So I think we can start our afternoon session of our international conference, La Lettera E il Leone. I'm very pleased to welcome our first speaker of the session, Tassos Papacostas, who's a lecturer in Byzantine Studies at the King's College London. And he's going to talk to us about architecture in Venetian Cyprus and the public use of word and image. So, Tassos, the floor is yours.
Grazie Lorenzo, grazie per l'invito anche a Mia. È un gran piacere essere tra voi, un grande onore e anche un piacere essere nel capolavoro di Carlo Scarpa in un palazzo gotico molto impressionante. Ecco. Allora, parlerò in inglese. My task, as Lorenzo said, it was to provide some context. We've already seen quite a few things relating to Venetian Cyprus. Let me just remind you some basics. Is that how it works? Yes. Well, as referred before, actually, Cyprus is the most distant territory ruled by Venice, distant from Venice, as you see on the map. The largest, in terms of square kilometers, the largest island ruled by Venice, a bit larger than Crete. The most populous, the population of Cyprus during the 16th century was rising and reached a level which was more or less the same as the population of Venice itself at that time. And Nicosia, the capital city, was indeed the largest city, it seems, of the Stato da Mar, so comparable to some of the cities of the terraferma in terms of size. Also the most important city in the Greek world in terms of size in this period, as many have noted among those present, other specialists. And I'm saying all this because none of this is reflected in the epigraphy, I think, as we shall see. So what did the Venetians find when they get to Cyprus in the late 15th century? Well, an island with all sorts of traditions in terms of artistic practices, architectural practices. And I'll show you a few examples here. There were, of course, fortifications going back to Byzantine times, not urban fortifications, but mainly castles, like the one we see top left, founded in Middle Byzantine times, redeveloped during the centuries of the Lusignan kingdom. There were ancient pilgrimages, like the shrine of the Holy Cross at Stavrovouni, allegedly with relics allegedly brought there by Helena Augusta back in the 4th century. This particular shrine becomes the most important, the most frequently visited by pilgrims and travelers passing through Cyprus, mentioned in lots of sources. There was, of course, in terms of architecture itself, the Byzantine bedrock of the island, the Byzantine traditions, represented here by the church at Peristerona from the Middle Byzantine period with its 5 domes. And then, of course, what was introduced during the period of the Lusignan kingdom, especially in the 13th, 14th centuries, the Cathedral of St. Nicholas here at Famagusta. So a very varied architectural as well as artistic landscape. That's what the Venetians find on the island. In terms of epigraphy during these pre-Venetian periods, centuries, well, we find inscribed texts quite a lot in funerary monuments inside churches, especially in Nicosia and Famagusta, in the Latin churches erected during the Lusignan centuries. Very rarely on the outside of buildings, and we've seen before the inscription, the foundation inscription from St. Nicholas at Famagusta, shown top right, in Latin. Many Latin inscriptions inside the buildings and a few on the outside as well. What is much, much more common are the painted inscriptions inside the churches as part of frescoes. The founders or donors to churches who commemorate their, I think it's this one. No, maybe not. But you can see it's there, the inscription, the Greek inscription, with the donors holding a model of the church above. So that's the, very roughly speaking, the epigraphic landscape until the Venetians arrive. So what do they do when they get to the island? What was built under Venice? Well, a lot of restoration work happens, especially after the destructive earthquake of 1491, so very soon after the official takeover in 1489. The sources mention private residences, urban residences, especially for the elite, of course, warehouses, barracks, administrative buildings, fountains, clocks. Very little of all that survives, unlike Crete, as we saw earlier today. Just bits and pieces, nothing in a good state. What does survive, and has indeed defined our views, well, contemporary views of the Venetian period, is military architecture, the fortifications. So they do survive, as we shall see in a minute. They are still there. And lots of churches. So the largest corpus of buildings from the Venetian period, from the Venetian century, let's say, consists of church buildings, especially in the countryside. I mean, there must have been in the cities as well. Several examples, they do not survive. So churches and monasteries of the countryside. Let me show you a couple of examples here on the screen. So all these erected in the late 15th, 16th centuries. An aristocratic foundation, top left, the pilgrimage shrine of St. Mamas at Morphou, a very peculiar type of architecture. The tradition of timber-roofed churches continues in the mountains, bottom left. One example there, you see what these churches look like. They're very often frescoed on the inside, but they don't have, of course, the domes and the vaults that you would expect in a Byzantine structure. You do get that in the lowlands and the foothills. One example at Cindy, I mean, this particular example doesn't preserve frescoes, but there are other comparable examples. And then Agia Napa, the monastic buildings, the residential buildings of the monastery, with an inscription recorded by, it was Alexander Drummond in the 18th century. It is now gone, it doesn't survive. But as you see, the date is 1530.
We now have an actual copy made of spec.
A copy, like a physical copy. Okay. How did you figure out the size? Okay. Oh, really? It would be very interesting to see that. Wow, okay. Fantastic. So as I said, fortifications, Famagusta, again, we've seen it, extremely important. It was a constant work in progress, actually, Famagusta, from the late 15th century down to the 1560s. Also Kyrenia, where on this plan you can see well, there is the Byzantine part of the building, the Lusignan in black, the Lusignan development, and then all of it encompassed within the Venetian bastion and much larger towers and all that. So a lot of work, a lot of expense, investments for these projects throughout the 16th century. Now, Famagusta is where a lot of the epigraphic evidence, of course, survives. Let me remind you that Famagusta was under Genoese rule from the 1370s down to 1460, roughly. So a few years before the Venetians take over, the city had experienced almost a century of Genoese rule. So it wasn't part of the Lusignan kingdom. It was, of course, the entrance into Cyprus, the most important port, the most important fortified settlement on the coast. A very ambitious project here with the updating of the fortifications. Again, we heard this morning of the Martinengo bastion northwest of the city and the Rivellino to the southwest with the Limassol gate, the land gate, the only land gate of the city. The epigraphy, I think here, as you can see with that example from one of the towers, I guess it would be safe to claim that it conforms to Italian, well, Venetian models of the period. We have the conception of this panel with the coat of arms, the script, the use of spolia, all these things are part and parcel of how one does this sort of thing. And it's all much more clearly seen in the fortress by the harbor. The fortress, again, was developed around its Lusignan core in purple on the plan, which was once more encompassed within the light green Venetian building campaign. This is bedecked with signs of Venetian authority. It has the largest concentration of inscriptions and lions of St. Mark. There are lions on each of the towers, the corner towers, and of course over the main entrance, which was visible, well, from the town. And the lions and inscriptions on the outer towers were, of course, visible from the harbor for approaching vessels. The typology, I guess, is quite common of these panels with the lions of St. Mark, the winged lions and the inscriptions, but note the variety of lions, which, of course, Rizzi has written about, which, to my mind, implies a variety of craftsmen, workshops working on these different panels at that time. And again, the use of spolia, different marbles, different stones, presumably from the nearby ancient site of Salamis Constantia to the north of Famagusta, which we know from the sources that it was being exploited in this period for columns and capitals and other architectural elements. The sea gate into the city, from the harbor into the city, of course, the most important part of this ensemble in Famagusta, contemporaneous with the fortress. I mean, this is not just a random sea gate. It is the sort of official entrance into Cyprus, into the Regno di Cipro, not just the entrance into Famagusta. Of course, other anchorages were used for when approaching Cyprus, but this was the principal one. And indeed, we see here the earliest manifestation of all'antica elements in Cyprus, so 1490s. And of course, it has been compared to the Porta dell'Arsenale. No, I should note first, of course, what you see, the lion on top, the full array of imagery, the lion, the inscription. We also saw a close-up of that yesterday, which names the official in charge, the Capitano Niccolo Priuli, with his arms in the roundels underneath, flanking the arch. So earliest manifestation of all'antica elements on the island, a pared-down, simplified version of the Arsenale gate, remembering, of course, that the Arsenale gate originally looked simpler without what we see now in front, the sculptures and all that. It would have looked a bit, well, as you see in the drawing, a bit more similar to its progeny at Famagusta. And again, the use of spolia, as at the Arsenale with the colors and the capitals, perhaps from Torcello. Here we have the spolia marbles used in the attic story above, again, presumably from the nearby site of Salamis Constantia. On the main square of Famagusta, which we see here with the cathedral, the Cathedral of St. Nicholas, there are several monuments which testify to this effort to turn this public space into a very sort of Venetian-looking space. There are the twin columns, not particularly visible today as there is that building behind them. A couple of logge around the square, the palace, the former royal palace, which got its new facade. All of this was erected roughly between 1510 and 1560, so within half a century. Now, despite all this effort, all these buildings around the square, I note that there is not a single inscription, at least not today. and as far as I know, none is recorded from, unless Gilles will tell us about something later on, none is recorded by anybody in earlier centuries. What they do bear, some of them at least, are is heraldic emblems, coats of arms of the officials in charge of these projects. And I put here this important testimony by Giovanni Mariti in the 18th century, describing this building, the new facade, telling us that it was covered in heraldic emblems, in coats of arms. And he says that there were the arms of the Republic. I don't know whether by that he means the arms we see in the keystone of the central arch, which are, of course, not Venice, but those of the Capitano in charge at the time. So perhaps we should imagine this a bit like facades here in Italy, in Padova, on the terraferma, lots of places with public buildings covered in coats of arms of Venetian officials in charge of these places. Here we are, the same facade with the arms of Giovanni Renier, the Capitano. The twin columns, for example, well, one of them shown here, no inscription, no heraldic arms either. We know about their construction date because of textual references. So I want to stress this apparent sort of discrepancy here, the proliferation of heraldic imagery and the lack of epigraphy, which may, to some extent, be due to accident of survival, but there seems to be, it seems to reflect more or less the reality of the time back then. Now, nothing here for these columns in Famagusta. If you go to Nicosia, however, the Venetian columns there, the Venetian column, single column there, is quite different. Well, there's, of course, the inscription in a very odd position at the very bottom of the base down there. Not, well, if you bend down, you can read it, but not in a very obvious place. It talks about the incorrupt faith, which is not affected, not corrupted by beauty, etc. And then on the plinth, on the hexagonal plinth that you see there on the right, there is more heraldry, representing here Venetian officialdom on the island. No names, no inscription, no, the sort of standard, more or less standard initials one very often finds flanking coats of arms. We don't get them here. Just the coats of arms, which presumably were expected to be recognizable and legible to everybody in Nicosia, starting with those of the Doge, perhaps. The question mark is for one panel that is missing. It hasn't survived. So different scenario here. One inscription at the bottom without names or dates or anything, and the coat of arms that do reveal, in a way, the dates and the identities of the officials. Well, now the walls of Nicosia, the last large-scale project that Venice undertook on the island, and we heard about it earlier, the names of the bastions reported through the sources. The northern ones in light gray named after Venetian officials, the rest after local aristocrats, members of the local elite who financed the project. Again, there's nothing on the bastions themselves. They don't bear any inscriptions or coats of arms. We know all this through the sources. I note also, of course, that the entire project wasn't exactly finished by the time of the Ottoman conquest, so perhaps the intentions were slightly different from what we've got today. The most important of the three gates into the city, by the Carafa bastion, the Famagusta gate, or Porta Giuliana, after Savorgnan, Giulio Savorgnan, that's what we've got there. A lot of heraldry, once more, without any inscription. This is the inside facade towards the city, the inside of the city. So no epigraphic record telling us about Giulio Savorgnan being in charge of the whole project, nothing about his involvement, his instrumental role. The officials, again, are not named, but They are represented by their coats of arms, and one can compare, as I did, the list of officials to figure out who is who and when exactly they were placed there. If we compare to other projects, non-state-sponsored projects, and how things work there, well, there are similarities and differences at the same time. If you look at this example, the Greek Cathedral of Nicosia, a much older building, there's a late antique basilica on the site, then there was a Middle Byzantine building, refashioned during the Lusignan period, a very complex series of building phases, and in the 16th century we get a new northern facade, together with the refurbishment of the whole building, that looks towards the Latin cathedral next door, and indeed with an architecture inspired from that of the Latin cathedral. You see this Gothicizing portal with various Renaissance elements incorporated. And here we have a very prominent display over the doorway, with 6 coats of arms. Well, 5 survive. Now, these are the heraldic emblems of those involved sponsoring the reconstruction, the refurbishment of this building. There's no Venetian involvement here. We are talking about local institutions and the local elite of Nicosia in a very prominent display, very visible. And I know that, thinking of what we've heard earlier about destruction in Crete, I mean, the cross on the marble lintel, for example, in a heraldic-looking shield, was never defaced, was never destroyed during the Ottoman period, although this was next to what became the main mosque in the city, the Latin Cathedral, the former Latin Cathedral. So it's still there, prominent display. Noting, and again, thinking of what we've heard with Crete and the destruction of the statue of Neptune from the Fontana Morosini there, you know, the officials, the Venetian officials, were not supposed to place their arms. There was legislation against this. They were not supposed to do that on buildings that were erected, founded during their tenure. And yet, as we know from everywhere, especially from Dalmatia, also from the terraferma, they were doing it everywhere. You see the gates of Verona covered with coats of arms, and many other places we see the same thing. So the regulations were clearly flouted. In this case, of course, that doesn't apply, because this is not about Venetian officials. Here there was complete freedom, liberty to display whatever the sponsors wanted to tell us, whatever message they wanted to broadcast. And indeed, this constitutes the most elaborate surviving heraldic display in Cyprus from this period, and it is not due to Venetian officials, although the models are obviously taken from what the Venetian officials were doing. Now, if we move to the countryside and see what is going on there, the little that is the little that survives, that is known in terms of, again, epigraphy and heraldry, this is a very rare example. We saw this with Lorenzo last year, I think. We went there. A rural church with that panel over the main western doorway, Greek inscription in the middle, illegible. I mean, this is because of the material. The material is local stone. There is no, Cyprus doesn't have any marble quarries. Any marble on the island was imported either in late antiquity and then reused in Venetian times. There may have been imports in this period too, directly from Italy, but that's not documented as far as I know. So it's the local stone called marmara, although it's not marble. It doesn't fare well in the open like that, battered by rain and all that. So the weathering is very severe. It's very difficult to read what is there, but it must certainly have to do with the patrons, whose arms must be those, for the time being, unidentifiable arms flanking the central panel. So what we see here is the percolation of these ideas into the countryside, which in a way it's not surprising, it's sort of normal, but there isn't very much of this. This is a very unique example, seeing this sort of full array of epigraphic, heraldic, and reasonably well carved, considering where we are in a small village with a rather humble church. And what is, of course, noteworthy is the use of Greek in this inscription, unlike most of the others that survive from this period. And this makes me wonder, what is the relationship between word and image? Why is the relationship what it seems to be? Imagery seems to be much more prominent. And I'll show you one example which is unrelated. This is a painted panel, a small painted panel on both faces. It has been interpreted as a physician's practice, the sort of panel for a physician's practice, because that's what the scenes depict. Again, there's no inscription telling us, enter here, we are open, this is your local doctor or pharmacist or whoever they were, these people. So there is perhaps a tradition that favors images rather than text on the island, which may relate to the multilingual landscape. Now, the multilingual landscape is not unique to Cyprus, of course. Well, maybe I'll stay to that one before my last slide. Dalmatia, the Aegean world, Crete, these are also, to some extent, multilingual environments. But perhaps Cyprus is a bit more extreme. There is a bit, Dalmatia, okay, you get Latin or Italian and the local Slavic languages. In Crete, you have Greek and Italian, Latin. On Cyprus, you've got a bit more than that. Okay, Greek is prevalent, but there's also Arabic, Syriac, Armenian. I mean, if we judge by the manuscripts copied on the island at that time, for example, think about around 50 securely dated manuscripts from the Venetian period copied on the island. Okay, the vast majority is in Greek, but there are also those other languages. Again, if one compares to the funerary inscriptions from this period, also roughly 50 survive, which are, well, there are more, but 50 are reasonably well preserved and reasonably well dated. So from funerary slabs inside churches. 2/3 of them are in Latin, 1/3 in Greek. Again, these statistics don't match, I think, the public epigraphy we've got from the period, but maybe if we see everything you've put together, things will change. So is that why images are so prevalent? Because of the difficulty of dealing with all these different languages, although Greek would be the obvious one, not least because of the prestige enjoyed by the Greek language during the Renaissance, and yet we don't see it represented in the inscriptions in any way. Again, I note the difference with Crete, where we do get bilingual inscriptions, Greek and Latin. Not many, but they are there. Not in Cyprus. So I will leave you with these thoughts. I don't have the answer to the thoughts, but I just wanted to raise the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tassos. We could and would, yeah, let's do so. Let's do like we did in the second part of the morning. So okay. If Gilles wants to come, and then we can have questions together for the two of you, yeah. So, our next speaker is Professor Gilles Grivaud. Former professor of the Université de Rouen, now happily retired, and based at the École Française d'Athènes. And he's topic today is traces épigraphiques dans la littérature de voyage de la Renaissance à Chypre. So, yes, I think. Siamo. Yeah, no, I think they do everything from there. No? Possiamo partire, Luca, grazie. Sì. Ah, ok, tranquillo. Grivaud, il primo. Sì, quello più in alto di tutti. Perfetto. Grazie mille. Bien à toi.
Grazie. Merci aux organisateurs de ce colloque. Je vais parler en français parce que, bon, le français est encore une langue scientifique. Quand on parle de Chypre, ou même dans l'histoire de Venise. Alors,
peut-être qu'il faut parler un peu plus dans le micro.
Alors, il n'a échappé à aucun spécialiste de la culture chypriote que le nombre d'inscriptions d'époque vénitienne laissées dans l'île se caractérise par sa faible ampleur. Si on prend le cas des inventaires accomplis, que ce soit celui publié par Tankerville Chamberlain en 1894 ou celui publié en 2004 à Nicosie, eh bien, ces inventaires cataloguent 18 inscriptions funéraires gravées en latin et en italien, auxquelles s'ajoute une quarantaine d'inscriptions non datées, plus 6 inscriptions en grec datées et une douzaine en grec non datées. Nous sommes donc en présence d'un corpus de quelques 80 témoins sur un total d'environ 1000 inscriptions funéraires, sans tenir compte des témoins héraldiques que ces inventaires n'ont pas considérés. Alors je pense qu'on en saura un peu plus sur ce corpus des inscriptions tout à l'heure. Alors, je considère malgré tout que cette maigre récolte peut en partie s'expliquer par les destructions climatiques, par les guerres et par les révoltes. On peut aussi, comme d'habitude, suspecter les intentions malveillantes des maîtres successifs de l'île après 1570, mais ces arguments ne me paraissent pas totalement convaincants, puisque nous possédons un inventaire d'inscriptions sur pierre et sur fresque bien supérieur en quantité pour l'époque franque, sans même rappeler la multitude de documents sculptés dans la pierre que les hommes de l'Antiquité ont laissés. La brève domination vénitienne sur l'île, à peine un siècle, n'explique pas à elle seule le volume réduit de preuves sauvegardées, surtout pour une période considérée comme celle d'une prospérité économique générale. Je fais référence aux travaux de Benjamin Arbel, évidemment. Au cours du XVIe siècle, les recettes que Venise tire de Chypre doublent de volume. La richesse des grandes familles ne cesse de croître, ce qui se traduit par l'élévation de palais et de résidences. L'essor des ressources est confirmé par les constructions, restaurations et décorations d'églises grecques où les programmes iconographiques provoquent parfois de longues dédicaces de la part des donateurs. Il existe donc une production épigraphique contemporaine, peinte en grec, qu'il conviendrait de considérer en parallèle avec celle sculptée en latin ou en italien. Cette combinaison d'approches permettrait de mieux apprécier, je pense, les conditions du recours à l'épigraphie dans la Chypre vénitienne. Les inscriptions vénitiennes échappent à la littérature produite dans l'île au cours du XVIe siècle. Les récits historiques, qu'il s'agisse du traité de Francesco Attar ou de l'Historia de Florio Bustron, se préoccupent davantage de retrouver les témoignages écrits et matériels de l'Antiquité. Ils ne décrivent pas les réalisations contemporaines et se limitent à de vagues références. Ainsi, Francesco Attar mentionne le château que les Templiers abandonnent à Nicosie en 1192, précisant «Dove soleva essere un castello che ancora ne appare i vestigi avanti la casa dove stava Messer Giacomo Cornaro». On ne sait rien de plus sur l'aspect de la demeure de Giacomo Cornaro, dont l'existence est associée à un événement mythique de l'époque franque. Florio Bustron, historien soucieux de défendre l'honneur de sa patrie, n'agit pas différemment de Francesco Attar. Dans sa notice sur Palais Pafo, l'actuel Cuclia, il rappelle le temple de Vénus, près duquel Giovanni Badoaro, gentilhomme vénitien, a fait construire un bellissimo palazzo, il quale si vede sin al presente maderelito. Là encore, la villa Badoer mérite une mention parce qu'elle se situe à proximité d'un site antique. Aucune description de l'architecture ou du style du bâtiment n'est fournie. Le désintérêt des auteurs natifs de Chypre pour les monuments contemporains caractérise aussi les Vénitiens qui séjournent dans l'île. On ne trouve pas de description de palais ni de relevé d'inscription chez Alessandro Magno, pourtant suffisamment attentif au style de l'habitat nicosiate pour le décrire et le dessiner. La constatation est similaire à propos du journal que Leonardo Donna tient durant son séjour dans les années 1556-1557. L'intérêt porté aux vestiges du passé l'emporte toujours sur le souci de décrire les monuments contemporains, comme le démontre à nouveau l'exemple de la Domo Badoer sur le site de la vieille Paphos, ici représenté sur la carte de Léonida Attar. La référence à la villa Badoer stimule notre curiosité, qui est tout à fait légitime, mais aucune description de la demeure ne retient l'attention des lettrés. Bon, il est vrai qu'à l'époque de Leonardo Donna et de Furio Bustron, le bâtiment est décrit en ruine. La focalisation sur la période antique caractérise donc la mentalité de l'époque. En témoigne encore la correspondance échangée à l'occasion de la construction de la forteresse de Nicosie par Giulio Savorgnan, dont on a parlé ce matin, entre l'été 1567 et le printemps 1568. Daniele Barbaro, patriarche d'Aquilée, sollicite ainsi le responsable du chantier pour obtenir des monnaies et des objets anciens qui pourraient surgir à l'occasion des travaux de creusement des fossés. Jamais Barbaro ne s'intéresse aux monuments détruits pendant les opérations et que Bartolomeo Nogero inventorie sans apporter de détails complémentaires sur les bâtiments. Il faudra donc attendre Étienne de Lusignan pour apprendre que dans les couvents des frères dominicains figuraient des autels décorés d'images peintes. Alors, face à la rareté des témoignages laissés par les lettrés sur leur environnement matériel immédiat, je vais tenter d'interroger les observations laissées par les voyageurs qui passent dans l'île durant la Renaissance afin de voir si leur attention est un peu plus aiguë envers les traces épigraphiques d'époque vénitienne. Qu'il s'agisse de pèlerins en route pour les lieux saints de Jérusalem, de marchands ou d'aventuriers, ils échappent au contexte intellectuel et politique insulaire. En principe, leurs regards décentrés sont susceptibles de fournir des informations originales. Alors je vais être clair, les mentions glanées sur les traces épigraphiques dans les littératures de voyage sont très rares. Dans une précédente étude sur les voyageurs français visitant la Chypre vénitienne, j'avais insisté sur leur faible intérêt pour la situation politique et militaire de l'île. Leurs observations se révélaient plus nombreuses et plus précises envers les traces de l'époque des Lusignans, dont ils relevaient quelques décors héraldiques. Néanmoins, impossible de conclure à leurs propos à une attitude patriotique systématique dans un groupe de 17 voyageurs, dont 2 seulement déploraient la cession de l'île à Venise. De fait, ces voyageurs français, tous en route pour la Terre Sainte, portaient leur attention sur les monuments religieux plus qu'aux témoins de la vie civile et politique. Alors cette conclusion, je peux le reproduire pour l'ensemble des voyageurs qui abordent Chypre entre 1474 et 1600. Leur trajet les limite à une approche des ports où les galères font escale, parfois à Paphos et à Limassol, plus souvent aux Salines et à Famagouste, et en fonction de la durée des escales, une visite est organisée à Nicosie sans que cela représente une règle générale. Alors je vous l'ai dit, la plupart des voyageurs sont des pèlerins en route pour Jérusalem. Leur curiosité porte naturellement sur les vestiges de la culture chrétienne insulaire. Ils listent les reliques conservées dans les églises, mais sans jamais décrire l'aspect des reliquaires, parfois en mentionnant les indulgences associées au culte. À Limassol, ils relèvent les destructions commises dans la cathédrale Notre-Dame. En 1494, le prêtre Piero Casolla observe dans une église, dont il ne révèle pas le vocable, un autel avec des sculptures en bois doré et la tombe d'un religieux originaire de Milan placé sous une pietà. Casolla a donc lu une inscription funéraire d'un compatriote, mais il ne l'a pas transcrite. L'attention portée aux sépultures installées à l'intérieur des églises se révèle plus marquée durant la première moitié du XVIe siècle, notamment à Saint-Nicolas de Famagouste, où le tombeau de Jacques II suscite des descriptions. Le prestige associé au catafalque royal focalise l'attention de plusieurs voyageurs, Conrad Grünenberg en 1486, Francesco Grassetto en 1511, Otto Heinrich, futur comte du Palatinat en 1521, John Locke 30 ans plus tard. Seuls 2 visiteurs allemands des années 1560 apportent des détails. Le bourgeois de Leipzig, Johann Elfricht, à la fin du mois de juillet 1565, et le noble originaire de Nuremberg, Christoph Führer von Heimendorf, au début du mois d'avril de l'année suivante. Les 2 Allemands copient l'intégralité du tombeau royal, mais Führer von Heimendorf donne une version plus correcte du texte latin, sachant identifier Catherine comme l'épouse de Jacques II. Les 2 Allemands relèvent d'autres inscriptions. Derrière le maître-autel, en haut à droite selon Elfricht, ils observent une plaque de marbre gravée d'une inscription latine célébrant l'installation officielle du pouvoir de Venise dans l'île par Francesco de Priuli le 28 février 1488. Cette inscription a depuis disparu. Selon l'abbé Mariti, elle avait été déplacée après le tremblement de terre de 1736, entreposée dans une salle adjacente, ce qui avait permis à Louis de Maslatri de la publier de manière sans doute plus fidèle en 1879. Chez Helfricht, les relevés sont complétés par la copie d'une inscription célébrant les travaux dans la cathédrale menés par l'évêque Baudouin Lodigan en 1302. On a déjà cité cette inscription hier et tout à l'heure. Alors, Helfricht donne une transcription italienne, vous le voyez, très réduite, fort approximative et résumée par rapport à l'original. Il faut admettre que l'inscription se trouve en situation difficile d'accès, puisque placée sur le 3e contrefort du flanc sud de Saint-Nicolas, en réalité, l'inscription, gravée en gothique et en ancien français, mentionne la reprise des travaux dans la nef centrale en 1311, à l'instigation de l'évêque Baudouin-Lambert. On en conclut que Helfricht répète la traduction édulcorée proposée par le guide qui l'accompagnait, sans aucun souci d'exactitude. Führer von Heimendorf complète sa visite en mentionnant les sépultures de Génois dans la cathédrale, mais il n'en conserve pas le nom. Il poursuit ses visites à Saint-Georges-des-Grecs, où il observe le tombeau de Saint-Épiphane, sur lequel il découvre une inscription grecque, mais elle est trop abîmée pour être lue. On voit donc que le faible intérêt des voyageurs pour l'observation des inscriptions dispersées dans Saint-Nicolas, dans différents paysages des églises de Famagouste, alors que tous sont unanimes à saluer la force et la beauté des murs fortifiés du port, qu'ils décrivent de plus en plus précisément, sans noter pour autant les marques par lesquelles le vouloir vénitien imprime les lieux. Et là, on doit constater que la notion d'espace épigraphique leur est totalement étrangère. À l'extérieur de Famagouste, l'excursion à Salamine et à la chapelle Sainte-Catherine fait partie de l'itinéraire proposé aux voyageurs par les guides professionnels. En 1546, le tchèque Oldřich Préfat observe dans l'église Sainte-Catherine des armoiries, des blasons, laissés par de riches pèlerins, sans les décrire. On ignore donc à quelle période ils remontent, pouvant être peints à des époques différentes sous les Lusignan, les Génois ou les Vénitiens. À Nicosie, les observations sur les inscriptions sont tout aussi rares. Début septembre 1518, Jacques Le Sage se rend à Sainte-Sophie, dont il remarque les 5 portes sur lesquelles il voit les graffitis laissés par des pèlerins, et il note en particulier le nom de Jean Potier. Plus tard, Führer von Heimendorf affirme y lire plusieurs épitaphes, mais il ne retient que le nom de Carolo Capello. Il délivre une version complète de cette dernière épitaphe dans la version latine de son récit publié à Nuremberg en 1621. Carolo Capello a effectivement occupé la charge de luogotenente à Nicosie, où il meurt en 1545, et son épitaphe exalte les valeurs chrétiennes de l'officier en un style littéraire imitant les épitaphes de l'époque romaine. Ce témoignage semble précieux parce qu'il démontre que les officiers vénitiens s'approprient Sainte-Sophie comme principale église funéraire s'inscrivant dans la continuité des pratiques des élites latines de la capitale. À l'épitaphe de Capello, Maslatri ajoute celle de Vettore Barbarigo, également luogotenente de Chypre, disparu 2 ans après Capello en 1547, à l'âge de 46 ans, et qui est enterré dans la cathédrale. Alors, ces 2 exemples assurent que le travail d'artisans tombiers chypriotes continue de satisfaire les besoins de l'aristocratie, avec des ateliers comprenant des tailleurs de pierre, des graveurs de lettres et des graveurs de décors. Pour conclure sur Nicosie, on peut ajouter en 1565, le franciscain portugais Pantaleo d'Aveiro est reçu au monastère Saint-Jean de Montfort, où il admire le tombeau de son compatriote, Don Juan de Coimbra, époux de Charlotte de Lusignan, décédé en 1457. Comme d'habitude, la description du catafalque est sommaire, puisque le franciscain mentionne les armes de Portugal sculptées, sans dévoiler d'épitaphe. Alors, au total, il paraît évident que dans leur ensemble, les voyageurs ne manifestent pas plus d'intérêt pour les inscriptions in situ que les historiens chypriotes ou que les Vénitiens de passage dans l'île. Alors, on aurait pu ajouter à la liste des tombeaux sculptés celui en jaspe vert que décrivent Pierre Barbâtre, Félix Faber et Antonio da Crema, mais encore une fois, leur intérêt s'explique parce qu'ils le considèrent comme un vestige antique et non comme un sarcophage byzantin. Et là, je reprends la démonstration de Lorenzo Calvelli. De surcroît, ce sarcophage de jaspe ne porte aucune inscription, donc aucun intérêt, évidemment, à leurs yeux. J'aboutis ainsi à un constat de carence en ce qui concerne les traces laissées par l'épigraphie vénitienne dans les récits de voyage. Seul Christoph Führer von Heimendorf apporte un témoignage substantiel à propos de l'épitaphe de Carolo Capello. Alors après, j'ai voulu enquêter l'évolution après la conquête ottomane de 1570. Et là, contre toute attente, l'attrait pour les traces épigraphiques du passé vénitien n'est pas ravivé. Certes, en 1591, le noble autrichien Johannes Christoph von Teufel, lors de sa visite à Famaguste, attribue aux Turcs les dégâts commis aux ailes de lion de Saint-Marc par des cours d'arquebuse. La même année, le Hollandais Johannes Sommer observe sur les places de la ville les armes symboles du pouvoir de Venise, c'est-à-dire le lion de Saint-Marc, tenant un livre ouvert avec les devises usuelles. Ces notations sont trop éparses pour être significatives. En réalité, la curiosité des voyageurs des 20 dernières années du XVIe siècle porte toujours sur les traces d'un passé large, sans spécialisation sur une période historique. Et on peut prendre l'exemple de Reinhold Lübbenau, apothicaire originaire de Königsberg, qui attire l'attention par le fait que ce voyageur fournit 3 relevés d'inscription sans qu'il soit possible d'affirmer qu'il les a réellement observés sur place. Il passe à Chypre à l'automne 1588 et son texte a déjà été analysé par Johannes Skoder en 1984. Le voyageur allemand note d'abord une inscription grecque gravée sur un bloc réemployé dans l'appareillage d'une porte de Famaguste. Pour Lübbenau, le texte assure que Famaguste occupe désormais le site de l'ancienne Tarmasus, ce qui semble évidemment bizarre à nos yeux. Sur un bloc inséré à une autre porte, il relève une longue inscription latine relative au proconsul de Chypre et à son épouse Flavia, qui remonte à la première décennie de notre ère. Ces 2 inscriptions dévoilent l'intérêt de Lübbenau pour l'Antiquité, qu'il connaît par des lectures lui suggérant des développements narratifs sur l'histoire de l'île. Cependant, on doute de l'exactitude des relevés. La seconde inscription a été décrite à Ancône, en Italie, à la fin du XIXe siècle, ce qui permet à Coder d'émettre l'hypothèse que Lübbenau a confondu, mélangé ses notes de voyage. En se promenant à Nicosie, où il visite Sainte-Sophie, Sainte-Catherine et Saint-Roch, Lübbenau note une inscription gravée sur la base d'une colonne. Elle rapporte les travaux de restauration entrepris par le roi Janus après les destructions causées par les armées mamelouques en 1426. Là encore, rien ne certifie que Lübbenau a vraiment observé ce qu'il décrit. L'inscription avait été publiée à Ingolstadt en 1534 par le mathématicien et astronome Petrus Appianus, dans un volume où étaient rassemblées des inscriptions anciennes trouvées en Occident et en Méditerranée. Rien ne prouve donc une nouvelle fois que Ljubenau n'a pas emprunté son relevé. En fin de compte, son goût pour l'épigraphie relève davantage de la mise en scène d'une culture propre à la Renaissance que d'un examen authentique de traces éclairant le passé de l'île. Dans cette logique, l'intérêt pour le passé immédiat, celui de la domination vénitienne, ne retient pas le voyageur. Un an après Ljubenau, c'est au tour du gentilhomme breton Jacques de Villamont de s'arrêter à Chypre, plus particulièrement à Limassol, où la compagnie d'un moine grec l'introduit à plusieurs vestiges d'un passé récent, qui concernent tous des personnages de l'époque des Lusignans. Évidemment, reproduit le texte des deux épitaphes. La première, sans armoirie ni effigie, rapporte Sigie Jean Cascar, chevalier qui trépassa de ce siècle le 15e jour d'octobre, l'an de Jésus-Christ 1318, Dieu et merci de l'âme dissolue. L'autre sépulture porte pour armoirie une croix dentelée aux quatre bouts, accompagnée de l'inscription Sigie dame Floride d'Anzerel, jadis femme de messire Jean de la Molée, chevalier, qui trépassa le 21e janvier, l'an de Jésus-Christ 1301, Dieu en est l'âme. Villamont n'affiche donc aucun intérêt pour l'époque vénitienne, comme la plupart des voyageurs français de son siècle. Il rappelle l'ancienne domination des Lusignans au château ruiné de Limassol, où il observe les trois lions avec les armes de Jérusalem. Il appartient finalement à Bartolomeo di Casteldurante d'apporter un regard plus attentif aux vestiges vénitiens à l'été 1593. Ce n'est pas une surprise, car Casteldurante accompagne le bel Vénitien Matteo Zane à Istanbul 2 ans plus tôt. Au terme de sa mission, Casteldurante décide d'accomplir le pèlerinage de Terre Sainte. À l'occasion d'une escale à Famaguste, il visite la ville dont il célèbre la puissance et la beauté des murs, l'élégance de la place centrale, où on voit toujours le palais des gouverneurs vénitiens et la cathédrale Saint-Nicolas, formée en mosquée. À proximité de la porte de la mer, il remarque 2 lions de pierre, un de grande taille, l'autre de dimension plus réduite. Enfin, sur la porte de la mer, il signale l'inscription Nicolao Priulo Prefecto 1496, accompagné d'un beau lion de Saint-Marc portant la devise habituelle. Il passe néanmoins sous silence les médaillons héraldiques figurant sur la porte. Alors, on voit qu'il faut attendre l'ultime décennie du XVIe siècle pour que les regards considèrent avec un tout petit peu plus d'attention les emblèmes que Venise laisse dans l'île. Néanmoins, la récolte d'inscriptions obtenue de la lecture des récits de voyage apporte peu de matériel neuf. On constate que les témoignages s'inscrivent dans une culture imprégnée du retour à l'antique, caractéristique de l'humanisme à la Renaissance. On peut donc affirmer que l'épigraphie et l'héraldique d'époque vénitienne ne font pas l'objet d'une curiosité scientifique avant l'arrivée des savants antiquaires au XVIIe siècle, le meilleur exemple étant évidemment Giovanni Antonio Soderini en 1671. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. So yes, please come here, and Tassos too, if you would like to come back. Ça c'est pour toi, de l'eau, si tu as soif. Ouais. C'est à toi. Attention aux filles. Merci beaucoup, Gilles, pour cette présentation très, très riche et stimulante, parce que je pense qu'il faut vraiment réfléchir sur le point que tu as bien exprimé. So I think we can switch to the discussion of these first 2 papers. And are there any questions for Tassos or Gilles? You have to press, yeah. Once, firmly.
OK. Une question pour Gilles. Comme tu as parlé de la dalle funéraire de Barbarigo, no? Le luogotenente.
Possiamo provare a fare domande in italiano, vi dispiace?
Sì, anche in italiano. Allora, la lastra tombale del luogotenente, quella... No, l'altro. C'è un altro. C'è una, la lastra a Istanbul oggi, nel museo archeologico.
Sì, quello di
Barbarigo, mi sembra, sì. No, la domanda che io penso sempre c'è tra tutti i rettori a Cipro, forse 1 su 5 è morto a Cipro, infatti, seppellito a Cipro. E monumenti funebri ce n'è solo uno, quello a Istanbul oggi. Tutti gli altri non hanno sopravvissuto. E forse c'è la domanda se le iscrizioni, l'epigrafia, i modelli artistici, scultorei di queste lastre avevano qualcosa di molto più interessante al confronto di quello che sappiamo oggi. Forse sarebbe un veicolo di introduzione,
Come faccio per saperlo?
Non sappiamo, è solo un... sì. Perché l'esempio di Barbarigo è un po'... non è molto interessante, diciamo. No. È molto normale.
Sì. No, ma hai ragione nel senso che ci sono tanti rettori che sono morti a Cipro, tanti ufficiali veneziani, e non abbiamo niente di sepolcri, di materiali funerali, niente.
E invece erano fatti da loro colleghi, dalle loro famiglie che erano con loro a Cipro.
Direi che mi pare che è lo stesso, non possiamo chiedere forse per la Creta, ma non ci sono tanti monumenti funebri di ufficiali veneziani in Creta o a Chalchida neanche.
Ok. Interessante come
sì,
constatazione, diciamo.
Sì.
Diciamo sicuramente, come anche nel caso dell'epigrafia funeraria franca, poi nell'epoca ottomana sappiamo che, per esempio a San Nicolò, a Famagosta, hanno comunque fatto piazza pulita di tutte le iscrizioni funerarie che hanno dentro la chiesa. Quindi...
Sì. Invece quelle dell'epoca
sì,
Lusignan
sono sopravvissuti. Sì, no? Non sappiamo quante rispetto alla quantità che c'era, ecco. E non sappiamo se questo sarebbe interessante se per esempio nella prospettiva ottomana quelle veneziane erano, diciamo, maggiormente passibili di distruzione. Ecco,
sarebbero capaci ottomani di distinguere tra...
Abbiamo detto che visivamente tra la gotica e la capitale c'è una bella differenza, quindi forse sapevano distinguere una iscrizione rosignana da una veneziana.
Sì,
e poi bisogna anche vedere quanti magistrati morti a Cipro magari poi sono stati, diciamo, ritrasportati a Venezia o sepolti a Venezia. C'è anche questo forse, non so se tutti, non so se anche Benny lo sappia questo, diciamo, non so se tutti quelli che morivano a Cipro in qualche modo erano sepolti lì oppure venivano poi riportati in madrepatria e sepolti qua. Prego Benny, perché secondo me tu se lo puoi abbiamo guarda un attimo che abbiamo lì, perché sennò da casa non sentono.
Ecco, no, mi vorrei riferire allo stesso problema. Un viaggio recente che ho fatto in Dalmazia mi ha colpito trovando iscrizioni, leoni, insomma, tracce diverse della presenza veneziana, superstite, sì, grazie al fatto che sono più alte delle altre. No, erano le altre che sparivano, erano troppo...
più difficili da...
Sì, erano facili da ricavare, da usare per altri scopi. Può essere anche il caso di Cipro o altri territori veneziani che poi sono passati nelle mani dei turchi o altri, insomma.
Sì, ma non spiega perché abbiamo tanto materiale funebre d'epoca franca, c'è tanto e c'è poco per Venezia. E non so, io non ho idea.
Beh, però i Lusignan risiedevano, cioè hanno risieduto lì per 3 secoli. I veneziani erano esponenti di una classe dirigente che si recava lì a governare. Cioè, comunque sì, diciamo, è un tema su cui secondo me interrogarsi, ecco. Forse possiamo anche riparlarne, mi piacerebbe fare una discussione finale, dopo anche che abbiamo presentato la risorsa digitale, per riflettere un po' su questi temi più ad ampio respiro, ecco, quindi magari prendere in considerazione anche altri territori, proprio riflettere, diciamo, come brainstorming su quello che...
Invece posso dire che l'epigrafia non era, diciamo, era usata nell'epoca veneziana in contesti, per esempio ci sono i 2 dossier dei monasteri dell'Englistra, di Neophytos, Ludivine connaît bien le dossier de l'Englistra, 1537, quello di Agios Savas di Scaron, sul monastero nella regione di Paphos. I monaci parlano di iscrizioni che provano, antiche iscrizioni, non d'epoca veneziana, che provano un certo punto che vogliono fare con le autorità veneziane. Allora, usano il testo che sembra antico, che interpretano come vogliono interpretare, come per un scopo preciso. È utile per loro fare questa cosa. Allora l'epigrafia non era dimenticata, diciamo, non era inutile anche per loro, e sarebbero iscrizioni greche nel caso dei monasteri.
Sì. Ma forse consideravano queste iscrizioni come antiche.
Sì.
Di qui
dei fondatori, dicono,
sì,
nostri fondatori che hanno scritto questa cosa sulla facciata della chiesa. Sì.
Non vengono definite, siamo sicuri che i testi siano epigrafici e non...
Gaia.
Il termine con cui vengono identificati queste iscrizioni, siamo sicuri che siano epigrafi e che non siano testi di altro genere? Ma
quello dell'inglese di San Neofito è un testo dipinto negli affreschi, sarebbe un testo di affreschi, l'altro sarebbe sulla facciata inciso.
Ok. Perché pensando all'epigrafia, se parlavi di testi in greco, l'unica cosa che mi viene in mente appunto sono le dedicatorie o comunque picte. Quindi siamo all'interno di un'altra epigrafia che è anche, volendo, più facile da falsificare o richiede un livello tecnico, e anche banalmente il materiale lì, cioè fai una modifica sull'affresco, ti crei una tabula o uno specchio epigrafico. Interessante. Per quanto poi riguarda, proprio veloce, poi la riprendiamo dopo. Per quanto riguarda le epigrafi, ovviamente la domanda che ho sempre avuto anch'io in mente, la sproporzione rispetto al materiale francese credo sia giustificata da sicuramente la più lunga dominazione francese e forse anche dal fatto che proprio la classe che poteva accedere a questo tipo di manufatti era più numerosa e quindi ha lasciato più traccia. Certo, ci aspetteremo magari qualcosa di più anche da Venezia, perché non è che non ci fosse proprio nessuno, personalità di alto livello c'erano e potevano permettersi le epigrafi. Forse sta da pensare appunto anche un po' alle pratiche, quindi cercare di capire se e dove venivano sepolti. Essendomi occupata poi della comunità cattolica di Terra Santa, Larnaca, in periodo più tardo, ci sono degli spazi, quindi ad esempio conosciamo quali sono i cimiteri dove i cattolici venivano sepolti in quel periodo, cioè era solo all'interno delle chiese o c'erano degli spazi appositi, quindi magari stiamo solo guardando nel posto sbagliato, e come tutti sappiamo a Cipro tante volte i manufatti magari ci sono, ma o sono stati reimpiegati o dobbiamo ancora trovarli.
Ma cioè, gli ufficiali veneziani sarebbero a Nicosia, per esempio, nella cattedrale, o forse c'erano un paio di quelle chiese distrutte per la costruzione delle mura di Nicosia, ma la grande parte sarebbero, immagino, da un paio di esempi che ne abbiamo, sarebbero nelle cattedrali che c'è sempre, con le lastre del periodo Lusignan.
Però ad esempio, domanda banale, conoscendo appunto la situazione a Cipro di survey, di ricognizione nelle chiese, quando è stata l'ultima volta che effettivamente si sono controllate le lastre pavimentali? Chi mi dice che non siano lì ma semplicemente siano state girate? Io non sono sicura.
Sì.
Cioè, credo che a meno che non siano stati fatti scavi, e parliamo dal 60 in poi, o restauri in edifici religiosi, non so effettivamente chi abbia controllato. Quindi magari, per quello dico anche, magari sono ancora lì o da qualche parte reimpiegati, ma semplicemente sono stati girati e non più ricontrollati.
Certo, può essere sicuramente.
Ma secondo me non c'era controllo, perché negli anni 60 il governo cipriota aveva altre priorità.
Sì.
Punto culturale, dovevano sviluppare il patrimonio greco e quello franco.
Sì, ci penso perché poi uno dei punti che tocco è la porta di Cherigna, dove chiaramente l'iscrizione veneziana, porta di Cherigna è lì. Sappiamo che non c'era, molto probabilmente Geoffrey, quando fa gli interventi di restauro e modifica la isola dalla cinta muraria e crea quella che vediamo oggi, trova queste epigrafi lì attorno, le rimette, quindi sicuramente c'è la consapevolezza del passato veneziano che si recupera, però è come se c'è inciampato, del tipo le ho trovate lì, ok, allora le metto e ricreo, tra l'altro andando a mettere anche le iniziali del re, quindi poi lì c'è tutta la retorica. Per quello il mio dubbio è appunto che effettivamente cioè io riandrei, se fosse possibile, e mi rigirerei veramente i pavimenti, perché secondo me qualcosa si trova ancora.
Non sono sicuro, perché per esempio quando sono andato a Negroponte ci sono tanti leoni eraldici, ci sono abbastanza iscrizioni pubbliche veneziane, ma non mi ricordo tanto di monumento funerale. Forse 2 o 3 nella chiesa, ma non tanto. Bisognerebbe cercare di più avanti.
Ci occuperemo della funeraria veneziana nei territori. Pratiche
progetto.
funerarie. Bello allegro.
Non è neanche che ogni veneziano, cioè anche a Venezia stessa, non è che tutti avessero un'epigrafe funeraria in chiesa, cioè anche quelle che sono rimaste a Venezia, che sono comunque una quantità, cioè, significativa, ma sono sempre ceti dirigenti, cioè sono comunque persone di una certa, di un certo livello sociale, ecco. Però secondo me, siccome tu questi temi so che li ritoccherai dopo nella tua presentazione, Gaia, forse possiamo rimandare a una discussione successiva, finale. Non so se adesso ci siano altre domande per Tassos e Gilles. O forse... Sofia.
Well, it's not really a question. It's
Speak up a little bit.
it's not really a question. I was amazed that not even the crosses are erased from the churches. And you said that there are no inscriptions on the walls, but there are the coats of arms, or not even that. In Nicosia.
Yes. Well, the example I showed of the Greek cathedral, we have those coats of arms, no inscription.
Sorry, it's 2 questions. One is with the cross. It's
It was there, visible, and not removed. But this, I mean, I think maybe it's not that surprising, considering that in St. Sophia in Constantinople, the mosaic with the Virgin in the apse was not covered until more than a century after the Ottoman conquest. So for some things, I think the Ottomans were not that bothered. If it wasn't too, well, in Constantinople it was obvious, but I don't know why it was too high up to remove it, to cover it. Yeah. Well, like on the Famagusta Gate, there are one of the coats of arms of the Bragadin has a cross. Again, that stayed there until the Ottoman aqueduct was built in France and concealed the facade which we see again revealed nowadays. But again, that wasn't destroyed.
Because in Crete, even in maybe they leave the coat of arm, but if there is a cross, they raise the cross. It's, it's even if it's a small cross or a small sign.
Well, which is what, well, what you mentioned, the specific context with that fundamentalist movement in the 17th century may explain that much better.
Thank you. So I think we can perhaps carry on. We now have a delicate technological moment when our colleague Avgustinos Avgusti from the Cyprus Institute will have to present. Quindi Luca adesso presenta il collega da remoto, Avgustinos Augusti da Cipro. And let's see if we manage. And Tatiana perhaps can come here too. Καλό απόγευμα, Αυγουστίνε. Μας ακούς?
Ναι, γεια σας.
Γεια σας, τι κάνεις?
Καλά, εσύ?
Μια χαρά, ευχαριστώ.
Μ' ακούτε καλά?
Ναι.
Πολύ ωραία.
Νομίζω ότι σε βλέπουμε και αν θέλεις, if you would like to share your screen, I think that we should be able to see it.
Just a second. Because the technology, you know, is not always. So can you see my screen?
Ναι, see, yes, insomma.
So thank you very much, Lorenzo, for having me. Also, I would like to thank Mia and everybody, of course, that contribute, Tatiana. And we created the database, the online database for the epigraphies that I will show you a short video in our way. We create this database not only to share the Cypriot epigraphies, but in the future to add more and more from whole Europe, Italy, etc. So we develop this with that on mind. So this is the front end, but I will show you a short video of how someone can add epigraphs in the system, and of course how the end user or the researcher can view these epigraphs. So I had in mind to create something simple to use, and of course Tatiana Tomasi, she helps a lot with the development of the database, especially the schema, the metadata schema that describes in detail the epigraphs. I believe she will talk about that after this short demo. So the first thing is for someone to log in. And of course, this can be a professor at the university in Venice or someone from Cyprus. I create different users with different groups and permissions. That means different groups can have different permissions. For example, let's say Tatiana, in this case, she may be not able to delete something or only update something. This is just for the future, so we can have more control of if we have more users from different countries, maybe Italy, Cyprus, Crete. Here you can see all the descriptions that are in the system. And of course, the list is quite long, and just show you just a few examples. And from here, with the click of the button, you can go and add epigraphs, inscriptions. You can add images, you can add the longitude and latitude of the inscription, and of course, all these metadata schema that we develop, especially this actually it was created by Professor Lorenzo and Tatiana. They give me all this information that they need. And of course, we try to create drop-down menus. So when somebody log into the system and adds information, we have the same information at all time. And of course, here it can relate the inscription with a monument. For example, in this case, maybe a castle. This case is the Othello Castle. And it can add the information that belongs to that monument or site. So as you can see, it's only click and save. Very easy to use. That was, as I mentioned, our point, our main concern. Here we see just an epigraphy with an inscription with all the informations in place. Just an example. This inscription has 10 images, and we can see the description, bibliography that is related, translation, apparatus, and of course the epidoc XML format that you will be able to see in a few seconds. Also, we can track the history. For example, we can see who did what. So I can see now that Tatiana, she added something, she changed something, or I can see if somebody deleted something. So in this way, we protect the system by tracking down what's going on. And in a few seconds, I will show you how this looks in the front end for the user. The end user, that means is maybe a researcher, a student that can find information about the project. Of course, the partners of the project, the team, about the platform. This is our team. But the most important is, of course, to find the inscriptions that we will see in a second. We thought of creating a symbol, an interactive map that you see here is in Cyprus with, let's wait to go up, with the flags that they represent all the monuments that they have inscriptions. And this, at this moment, we're gonna see just one or two examples. For example, if we zoom up in the map, we can see the Othello Castle. And when we click, we can navigate it to the detail page of the Othello Castle. At this monument, we have a 3D representation of the castle where the user can navigate, can flip, can see the whole castle, also can make measurements with this tool, and a lot of functionality using the 3D model. Below that, we see all the descriptions that we add in the backend about the castle, and also how many inscriptions they belong to Othello Castle. We can see this is just the first page. By clicking to one of the inscriptions, we can see more details and all the descriptions about the specific inscription. Of course, an image, in this case, it's just one, but of course, some of them has, I will show you later on, they have more images. Of course, the description that Diana, of course, added to the system, bibliography, and all this data with transcription, translation, apparatus, and of course the full EBIDOC XML format. This is meant for the interoperability of our system or the inscriptions with other descriptions. I believe later on Tatiana, she can explain more of the use of that. I will show another example and with more images. For example, let's see, I think I choose a nice one that also has the lion. We can click, of course we can see all the information again. I don't have to go over and over. And the images, we can take a closer look. They are high definition images, very clear. You can see details. You can see with this viewer all the images together. And of course, you can zoom in and see, as I say, details on the epigraphs. Of course, we can add more technology. We can add 3D models of epigraphs. This is something that we'd like to see in the near future, or maybe RTI images. And this is the end. Thank you very much. And of course, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. And I hope in the near future, we'll be able to add more inscriptions, not only from Cyprus, but for whole Europe. Thank you very much. I believe Tatiana, she wants to continue and say something of how we created the database, how she helped. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agostinos. That was really, really interesting. And yes, stay here or stay there so that we can ask you. I think we will have Tatiana present now, and then we can ask the public if they have questions for any of you. Sì, lo fanno partire.
Sure, thanks.
Ok, Luca, allora, questo Tommasi. Sì, sì. Sì, sì, posso accendere. Vicino.
Good afternoon to everybody. Yes, in my presentation, I aims to explain the overall contents and structural features of the online database. Venetian inscriptions in Cyprus, the digital resource that constitutes the main output of the project LETTERA E IL LEONE, jointly developed by the Foscari University of Venice and the Cyprus Institute, and mainly devoted to the study and digitization of epigraphic evidence produced during Venetian rule of Cyprus. My presentation is divided into two main sections. First of all, I will analyze the contents that have been inserted in the database and that are currently displayed online through the front end of the platform, available through the link visible at the bottom of the slide. Then I will explain how the database has been created, especially from a theoretical point of view, focusing in particular on the structure of epigraphic fields and on the connections established with other resources already available online that have been taken into consideration for the development of our digital platform. In order to define the object of our analysis, we proceeded with a bibliographical research, starting from the contribution published by Brunilde Mo in 2004, entitled Lacrime Ciprie. Currently, this book still represents the significant epigraphic catalogue of the lapidary inscriptions produced in Cyprus during the reign of the French-born dynasty of the Lusignans and the rule of the Venetian Republic. This work by Mo has been the starting point for further bibliographical research, especially on recently published contributions, with the aim of updating and enriching her studies. 27 inscriptions have been selected as suitable for the insertion in our database, because they were written in Latin and produced in the chronological period considered, from 1474 to 1571, or they had strong connections with the political shift from the dynasty of the Lusignans to the government of Cyprus by the Venetian Republic. For example, the epitaph of the Lusignan king of Cyprus, James II, who died in 1473 and was the husband of Caterina Cornaro. After the selection of the corpus, particular attention has been dedicated to on-field examination, measuring contextualization and photo sessions of the inscriptions by members of our research team. As Augustinus has shown in the first part of our presentation, in the database, the inscriptions are organized and retrieved according to the sites where they are located. These locations are georeferenced and are indicated by flags on an interactive map that can be explored by the users. For each site, there is a brief description with the main historical information, and if possible, a 3D model or a photo. At present, only for the location Otello Castle, there is a 3D version, but more models of monuments can be added in the future. Each site constitutes a cluster, which groups together all the inscriptions attested there, including both epigraphic objects still visible at the moment and lost ones. This process is extremely valuable in order to reconstruct the epigraphic landscapes of the past and, as a consequence, fully understand the historical meaning of the inscriptions. Furthermore, connecting the epigraphic monuments to their context helps to better understand their life cycle and their political and sociocultural value as means for communication. From the analysis of the corpus included in the database, it has been possible to identify 16 different sites, distributed among the 6 territorial districts of Cyprus. These locations are constituted by elements of different types. Political buildings, like the so-called Proveditors' Palace in Famagusta, monuments with a strong ideological meaning, for example, the Venetian column in Nicosia, military structures, as the so-called Otello Castle, city walls, like the Sea Gate at Famagusta, and many religious constructions, for example, Famagusta's St. Nicholas Cathedral. Grouping the sites according to the 6 districts of Cyprus, it is possible to see that most of them are in the territories pertaining to Famagusta, 17 inscriptions out of 27, corresponding approximately to 63 of the total, and Nicosia. Certainly, these data are not fortuitous. The two main cities of the island performed a fundamental role also during the Venetian period. It also seems significant that the sites with the highest number of inscriptions are those of the so-called Otello Castle and the Proveditors' Palace in Famagusta. In fact, these monuments included strong symbolic and ideological elements, which perfectly embodied the strategies of communication used by the Venetian government to affirm its power. It seems significant also that the majority of the inscriptions attested in the 2 sites of Otello Castle and the Proveditors' Palace were building inscriptions, therefore displayed in public spaces and clearly visible. In this second section of my talk, I will focus on how the structure for the epigraphic records has been created and which aspects have been taken into account. First of all, we have considered the aims of a project, both in its immediate results and in its possible future developments, and the peculiarities of epigraphic evidence analyzed. It was important to develop a resource able to manage a holistic approach to the inscriptions and which could guarantee the possibility to investigate the monuments in their materiality, but also in their historical, political, and sociocultural implications. Therefore, particular attention has been paid to three main aspects: an important visual apparatus, recorded with recent photos and 3D models, to document the epigraphic monuments, their iconographic elements, and paleographical characteristics, georeference data, and the visualization on a map of the locations of the inscriptions, and finally, historical and sociocultural information. Secondly, we have considered the structure of already existing online databases of inscriptions and epigraphic resources developed in the most recent years and compliant with the up-to-date standards. For example, iSicily, Inscriptions Roman Tripolitania, Epigraphic Database False, the Europeana Eagle Search Engine, Digigraph, or the innovative platform Editing Tools for a Digital Epigraphy. Finally, we have taken into account the principle of open science, including the need to produce fair data. That is to say, data that are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. In order to be compliant with these principles, the database is available in open access, and each of our epigraphic records has its own ID. Furthermore, to guarantee the interchange and reuse of data, we have adopted different solutions. First of all, we have connected our data with other resources already available online. For example, the names and the coordinates of the sites have been inserted according to any existing records in the geographical database GeoNames, which also helps to better define a place, entity, and disambiguate different places with the same names. Secondly, the fields of our database and the metadata associated with them have been chosen accordingly to the categories and elements of the controlled vocabularies defined by the Eagle Europeana project for the following elements: object type, material, decoration, state of preservation, type of inscription, and execution type. Finally, we have put particular attention in developing the metadata of the inscriptions in a fully compatible way with the EpiDoc XML guidelines, which is currently recognized as the international standard for encoding of epigraphic evidence. Furthermore, for each record, we have made available an EpiDoc edition, which can be visualized in our database and reused for further analysis. As far as the accessibility and reusability of bibliographical data is concerned, we have devoted specific attention in creating a specific group library for the project using the platform Zotero. This group, interlinked with the bibliographical sections of each cataloged inscription, allows public users to view all the details about a contribution, have direct access to it if it is available online, explore the whole library, and export it in different formats. Furthermore, our Zotero group is a collaborative library that could be easily implemented in case of future developments of the project. This database is significant not only because it is the first online open access platform dedicated to Venetian Renaissance epigraphy, but for several other reasons. In fact, it presents an updated edition of a specific corpus of inscriptions that can be used for developing future scientific research. For example, a more detailed investigation of the workshop responsible for the realization of the inscriptions recorded. Furthermore, the rich body of recent photos and 3D models and the georeference map of the sites presented in a user-friendly and intelligible way fulfill dissemination purposes and contribute to spread the knowledge of Cyprus cultural heritage. Finally, one of the most important values of this database is that it can be expanded in different directions. First of all, we are planning on adding specific search tools that will allow the users to filter the metadata in a more refined way, for example, for type of monuments, iconographic elements, and so on. Furthermore, the corpus of inscriptions can be expanded to include epigraphic evidence from other periods, such as the inscribed monuments produced during the time of the Lusignans, or territories, primarily those that belonged to the Venetian Republic and Venice itself. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tatiana, and sorry for not having time to introduce you, but Tatiana Tamasi is a PhD student at the universities of Udine and Venice, and she's particularly competent in digital epigraphy. All right, so it's now time for questions. I think that some of you may be curious to know more about our new digital resource, which is now freely available online. I would like to clarify that what Augustinos showed us is the back end, so what he sees or what us as people who work on the database access in, let's say, in the private area, but the resource is freely available to anyone without registering or anything like that. So you just need to click on the link that you can find in all over.
Yes. Sorry, Lorenzo.
No worries, but I know it, but maybe it wasn't clear enough. So, yes, Sophia has a question.
Yes, I heard well that at the moment there are 27, but the whole of inscriptions in Cyprus, how many are there? So, what I want to ask, because I've been working with databases, different databases, and there is a problem. Many of them are really, really wonderful, and they have all this possibility to become and to put a lot of things and also to interconnect with other ones. So it's really incredible tools to for studying. But usually the problem is that there is not enough people to put in the data. So how is the data, how are you going to put all the data? That means money, really. Usually that's the problem that I have encountered, that you need, we have all this knowledge, we can put it in these databases that they can be open access to people, and then people can, from all over the world, can compare and see the inscriptions, for example, but usually the problem is that not all the information is there. So it's from personal experience that I would like to know what are your thoughts about
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this question. If you don't mind, Augustinos and Tatiana, I will say something and then I will leave the word to you. So perhaps first of all, I would like to clarify that this is a small project. So it's a project funded by the Regione Veneto, like I said yesterday, and it has a small budget. And most of our budget, at least a third, if not of our budget, has been devoted to creating the digital resource, because we wanted to have a digital resource that is solid, that, as Tatiana and Augustinos explained, is compliant with the current standards in digital epigraphy, and that above all can be later expanded to include more data. So the structure is there. We now have 27 inscriptions where we could have 1,000 or 2,000, it doesn't matter. The fields are there, the metadata are there. We knew, this also goes back to Gilles' presentation, that the body of Venetian inscriptions from Cyprus is small. And with the project that we had, we wanted to work on a small body of evidence because, like you said, we had no budget for working on, I don't know, not just to mention the Lusignan inscriptions, there would be too many for the projects that we're working on now. But now, once we have the structure, and I'm really happy, for instance, that the Cyprus Institute has invested a lot in this, because it shows that there's an interest in Cyprus, in a Cypriot institution. The database could have been developed here too. Foscari hosts several databases. One of my epigraphic databases is here. But I wanted this, in the application, we explained this very, very clearly with Mia too. We wanted this resource to be in Cyprus so that for future developments on Cypriot epigraphy, first of all, we know that Cypriot epigraphy is very rich from antiquity to the medieval and later periods. Think of Ottoman epigraphy, just to mention something. It could all go in the same resource. And of course, at the same time, it can be expanded to other areas of the Venetian state. So right now, there are a few records because the body of records that we wanted to work on was limited. We worked on public epigraphy from Venetian Cyprus. And to that extent, I would rather say that all of the inscriptions, all of the public inscriptions from Venetian Cyprus are there. We could expand it to funerary inscriptions, to graffiti, or to other inscriptions from other places or other chronologies. And sorry, but I think it was important to say this because maybe it wasn't clear enough.
My question was more general about this. It was not.
No, but you gave me the opportunity to.
What's going on, but I'm working now at the database of an ERC project. There's a lot of money there, but still we have the same problems. That's why I asked this. And also, when the money stops, who will? Because
take that. We're perfect. I am very well aware of that.
So it's a general question.
Yeah.
It's not specific.
Mia, perhaps?
I wanted to add that the important part for me is also that we can connect with our databases already existing. Therefore, through the EpiDoc, we can insert the ID and connect to this record already online. And there is also the possibility to have a synthetic brief record in our database and then connect to our resources more detailed.
So just to go back to the question, because I've been working project-based for the past 6 years, so I know very well the situation. I think the important thing in this case is that we built the resource, so now whoever else want to want to use this tool that is there, free, accessible and usable too, can submit a proposal, find his own funding, contacting the institute and said, okay, we have this, let's consider the material I want to insert, if some modification, adaptation needs to be done. The database is very flexible, the fields can be, the descriptors can be extend, other specific sections. So it's very flexible on one side, and on the other, it gives the possibility to researchers to already have something, because you know very well when you present a project, there's always the issue, okay, I'm going to build a database, and in this case, if you work on Venetian epigraphs in Crete, that would be amazing. Maybe 5 years or 10 won't be enough to put all the material, but you can say, okay, there's the resource, there's the platform there. I just need the money to have the team to work, prepare the material to be in. So I think this is already something, and of course, money-wise, yeah. It's,
I would just like to stress that the link, the domain is Venetian inscriptions. Full stop. So we were looking towards some kind of future. Exactly. It can mean a lot.
Can I add something to that?
Of course, of course.
This, I understand the problem, as we say, is everywhere, but depends also people how much they want to work. For example, I remember Mia in her project, she was able to add almost 2,000 graphitos in less than a week. So she was organized and she was populating the database so fast. So I believe if you are a serious researcher and you want your data to be disseminated online for other researchers or the public use, you have to find a way to do it. Some other people, they hire, let's say, interns or PhD students sometimes, or students to do this hard work. So this is just of course, my thought.
Thank you. Could I ask, well, yeah, two things. One is to do with functionality, and the other, I will remember it. It will come back. Yes, you did mention linking it to other databases. Is this already done, or is it? Yeah. I was thinking more of not necessarily epigraph. Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking, because there are so many databases out there which one could link. You know, if a Venetian inscription mentions a Venetian official, you've got the rulers of Venice database. If you're talking about Famagusta, you've got the Cathedral of Cyprus at King's, for example, which is a topographical thing, or the Kitchener map of the Silvia Ioannou Foundation. I mean, you can go on and on and on. Maybe it's more a problem, where do we stop? Where do you stop, actually? What do you consider directly relevant and what not? I mean, it looks nice and it's very functional if you've got lots of links to related things, but maybe at some point there's too much, I don't know. Yeah, anyway, that's, I guess, for the future. The other question has to do with what is recorded in the database, and I think we've discussed this before with Lorenzo, the support, the material of the inscriptions. I assume you're based primarily on what the publication says about whether it's limestone or marble or this or that. Do you make corrections if you notice something, like it's this kind of marble or that kind of stone? You do, okay.
Yes, because there are members of our teams that made autopsy of the inscriptions. Therefore, if we noticed that it wasn't marble, we corrected it. Yes, okay. Maybe it should be described in a more detailed way when we change the bibliography, maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
In the Epidoc record, everything is more detailed. It's the record in the front end and the Epidoc are compatible, but in the Epidoc there is the possibility to add more things. In the front end there is a description field that can be filled in with every details, but some fields are more restricted, are drop-down menus, therefore.
Yeah, okay.
But there is the possibility to add the details and to specify, yes, we have changed this information from the bibliography.
Okay. And until the next project where you will tell us which quarry the marble came from and which quarry the stone came from.
You just spoiled what I was going to say in the conclusions. I'm just joking. No, I mean, Mia and I tried to carry out a specific on-site inspection of most of the inscription. And above all, this is the good thing about this is that this is a flexible, dynamic resource. So whatever mistake one sees, it's not limestone, it's marble, or the measurements are not correct, we can just update it. So that's a good thing about the digital resource. And as Augustino's explained, in the back end, you have a versioning of all the changes that are made. So whatever change is made, we are aware of that. So we can also decide, when you create a database, you always have to decide how much data are you going to share, how many metadata are you going to... If it's too heavy, I think that people won't like it. So you have to put the right amount of information, I think. Otherwise, it's too much, and it's too complicated to fill in a single entry. So I've been dealing with databases that were too rich, in my view. So this one, I think, offers a right amount of information. It's based on previous experiences. Me too. Originally, I wasn't in favor of creating a new resource because I also think that it's full of databases. And but for this specific kind of sources, we didn't have anything that we could use. So when something is there on the net, it's virtual. But like you said now, to make it more and more visible, you need to make it interoperable. So the more we add links to existing resources, to people, to places, to editions or whatever that appear inside. And then the other way around, from those resources, you add links to our resource, the more visible it will become. So that's the way. Now it's a small body of data, so we can do whatever we want with them, basically.
Thanks for this presentation. It's a wonderful resource, and I think absolutely that's right, that you work on a small scale, get the platform right, and have a scalable platform for the future. I mean, this in a way follows on from Tassos's point about the materiality. I mean, from the discussion this morning, I mean, it'd be tremendously useful to have the inscriptions in 3D. If you have the 3D model of the castle, but actually to have the surface of the inscriptions scanned in 3D, I wondered whether that was something which you'd thought of or would be feasible. Some of these are, of course, quite high up on monuments.
Well, it's certainly feasible. We didn't mention it, but it goes without saying that, because the map showed it, that most of the inscriptions are in the northern part of Cyprus. And our permissions are given by the Department of Antiquities of the Republic of Cyprus, which has a physical control of the free part of Cyprus. But okay, we went and took photographs in Famagusta and elsewhere, and it wasn't a problem. But if you have to use a drone, or if you have to, do more sophisticated technology, it's a bit of a diplomatic issue as to how you're going to carry out those activities. We tried to involve UNESCO, the UNDP, and and I think that so far, I mean, it was fair enough to go on in a simple way. But if we wanted to do more complex things, then a little of diplomacy. That's why, for instance, I wanted the Italian embassy to be one of the partners of our project, because Cyprus is a delicate place to work.
Can I add also something
Please.
About the technology? Mm-hmm. At the Cyprus Institute, especially for surface like epigraphies, inscriptions, or coins, we use the technology that is called reflectance transformation imaging, that gives you a very good results, in some cases better than the 3D. So this is also something that we can add in the future.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. If there are no more questions, I think that we can go with the last presentation of today, which also in a way completes the picture, in my view, of our project, because as I explained at the very beginning, Mia is a partner and co-organizer of the conference and of the... Okay, so please. So our next speaker is Mia Trentin, who's a Foscarina, but also based at the Cyprus Institute. And she will get into some of the information that we retrieved from the database and talk to us about Venetian epigraphy in Cyprus and also of its fortune. So Mia, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm the last one. It will be short because actually during this week I was trying. I mean, there's not so much to say at this point. What do I mean? We talk about the epigraphs. We did this resource that was the main aim of the project, and yes, it's very important, but I think that further analysis will really help us to have some new data to share. We know as I said in last year's presentation, launch of the project, we know the corpus is really small. That's also why we decided. It's small, but it's also very flexible and useful to start some consideration about, I mean, you can, with a small corpus, better work and frame question, understand links. So it's not so much so complex to work with small corpus that are very representative indeed. Why? Because of course we are in Cyprus. We are talking about the farthest Venetian land, a multicultural island with different dominations. So there's a lot of elements that plays a major role, and then there's Venice arriving. So today I won't focus so much on the object, so on the epigraph, talking about epigraphy. We had an amazing, this morning, amazing presentation about Venetian epigraphy and inscriptions. What I would like to do is to take a broader view and approach and reflect a bit on, I'll keep the time, and reflect a bit about the epigraphic landscape we mentioned. That is one of the key points of the conference. So epigraphic landscape, it has these two words, epigraphy and landscape. Epigraphy, so inscriptions that are this medium of communication, but there's also the landscape. So I would really like to think what they represent. So with inscription, we have, as we said, exposed writing. Inscription are set in stone. We still use this expression when we want to keep a memory of something that happened. So it's a really strong and public mean of communication. And on the other side, we have the landscape that is not only the context in which these inscriptions are born and developed, but it's also the physical, natural, urban, rural, human, I would say, landscape. Because of course, inscriptions are the product of a society of humans, and that shape with this inscription the landscape by leaving a sort of this memory landmark all around. So starting, again, it was very inspiring, Professor Ferguson's talk this morning, mostly when he mentioned the expression, the medium is the message. It's something that lately I'm really reconsidering a lot in the field of epigraphy in general, in the field of inscriptions and writings. Why? Because I think that, as we will see in a while, the medium Venice used in their epigraphs is not only the writing, the introduction, or the kind of script they introduce, but it's all the system. So the way they really managed to combine, and here we go back to the title of the project, The Lion and the Letter, Il Leone e la Lettera e il Leone. Why? Because, and here I'm going back also to what Tassos was wondering before about imaging. I think when we have both things works better. So communication, of course, happens through text, textual communication, but if we think what we are living today, our world is mostly made up of images. And in a global world, as was in a sort also, or the Venetian network, images for sure played a major role. In which sense? We have a multicultural island, multicultural context in Cyprus, but if we consider the broader Venetian territories, it's really very rich. So who actually was able to read and understand the text that was written in Latin? Okay, with a clear script that maybe even someone with a very basic level of literacy could sort of recognize some patterns, maybe the date, who knows. But by placing such a strong figure, they were sure that the message could reach a broader public. So what I will do, it's just an excursus.
Vero Luca? Forse se no andiamo, se no vado io, mi passo in francese.
So I wanted to start from the end, from the fortune of the lion and also the letter. If you do a search, Venetian lion, Cyprus, the top results, and I think the first 3 pages, present this picture. I mean, it's a huge success. I could really end up my presentation here saying, okay, we are done. We have the iconography, everything is there, the book, the inscription, the lion. The location. Here, I don't know if all of you are familiar, it's really popular in Cyprus. We are in Larnaca. Big surprise, because Larnaca is one of the cities that is considered having the least monument or archaeological landmark of the Venetian past. But we are just next to the castle on the seafront, and looking at the lion, the Church of St. Lazarus is exactly at our back. So again, we see that it's not only, parenthesis, sorry, this was placed in 2011 after the twinnings between the city of Larnaca and the city of Venice through the Festa della Senza. So Venice does not do these twinning ceremonies, but there's, during the Festa della Senza, that is the Ascension, they have this special ceremony, and every year a city from the territories of the Venetian, of the Republic are chosen, and they commemorate and they keep strong the connection with the Venetian territories. So this happened in 2011. The lion arrived in Cyprus. Larnaca was the city chosen for this. It's there, and since there, it's really one of the key and identity even point of the city. People walking there, one of the things maybe one day we should consider to do, is even to go there and ask people if they recognize not only local, but a lot of tourists. It's of course very Instagrammable, so also it's taking a lot of pictures. And this is to say what? They succeeded. They managed to place again this marker commemorating an event that happened that bear reference to the history of Cyprus and partially also to the city of Larnaca. And if we look at it, we can detect as epigraphist. Okay, I would really like to have comments about the script in the book and also the characteristic of the lion. But it's the symbol that the one that really is strong and stayed strong. So how does this happen? How they managed to build this very successful combination between text and image? Venetian arrived, and let's say they had already a little help. Why? Because the lion was already present, and it's not by chance. I mean, it's present here, as you can see, in the coat of arms of the Lusignan family. It is present also in other royal families all across Europe, as we know. But it was already circulating, and not only circulating on official monuments, but people exchanging coins, money, coat of arms. Here we are at the entrance to the courtyard to the Carigna Castle. And, okay, it's not working. And the frescoes are with the lion again, and the coat of arms of the Lusignan is Royal Chapel in Pierga. So they were sort of start placing their symbol, their coat of arms, the same way we saw also in Tassos' presentation, marking the building, but also a sort of affirming their presence through a very recognizable symbol. Here, in a more official way, we see, of course, St. Nicholas in Famagosta. They were doing this also on a more high and official level. Here, we already saw it is the inscription for the construction of St. Nicholas in Famagusta. And they placed the inscription there, but we are still in the phase when the ruling class is trying to affirm their presence and their power through placing these very recognizable symbols and inscriptions on public monuments. Is what Petrucci described for Italy, like the inscription going out from churches and start spreading across first outside the church and then all around the urban landscape. I think the next one, yes. So this inscription is very high, and I think here we can really understand that writing here was functional. I mean, I recorded it in stones, but I don't care so much about the public. Who can see and read this is really difficult for us today too. Can you imagine people that were not familiar with French and with the Gothic script? They could just see some script there without really understanding the meaning. So what's the point? The point was to mark the territory with something that commemorates that event, nothing more. But as we said, we already have the writing and the figure of the lion circulating. Here again, we have we are again in the Royal Chapel in Birga. So writing was present, always in combination with images. So always, in this case, is the other way around. So the inscription is supporting, actually, is didascalic for the image. As we said, other examples more on a private, not so private sphere are the funerary monuments. We can have again the two, so writing that is complementary to the figure of and the figuration, or we can also have a single inscription recording the death and the passage of someone. So this is more or less the context that Venetian found when they arrived. And again, this inscription that is lost but is mentioned by Maslatri, Gilles talked about this more. It's here just to show how clear is the opening, I would say, of Venice. They arrive, they, of course, record the event on stone, and the date, to someone studying Venetian history, is very, it sounds very funny, let's say, because it's the last day of the Venetian year. So it's 28th of February, 1488, but actually we are in 1489. So it's like a manifesto. We are here, we commemorate the fact that we took the power by hanging up the Vessillo of St. Mark, and the date is the date in More Veneto. So we already enter and we already start managing things in our way, let's say. Venice, this is a late example. Venice 2, coin money, and the lion was again, here we have the lion, the so-called Imoeca, on a coin dated towards the end, 1570, but the mint was in Famagusta, just to confirm that they consolidated the figure of the lion, and it was it entered really also the production, the little production of money. What you see is another database that most probably will be connected with ours. It's the database of the coins of the Bank of Cyprus Cultural Foundation that is hosted at the Institute in our digital library Dioptra. And the collection is about the Frankish and Venetian coins of the Bank of Cyprus collection. Here also you can really, beyond having all the data concerning the coins, you can see very detailed picture of the coins with RTI technology, the one that Augustinus was describing before. So it's really important resource, just to promote a bit also other database we did. So the lion was again circulating, and was circulating, of course, also, this is the Contarina. It's a later example, but we should think, as we saw with Donald presentation, that someone was going around the Adriatic, even the Mediterranean, was seeing Venetian ships with this kind of flag, so again with the lion, was going down the Adriatic, stopping and seeing the sea gates of other cities, monuments in other cities with the lions. So the lions at a certain point, I think, for sure, between the 15th and 16th century was a really present figure for people traveling in the Eastern Mediterranean. And then we arrived to Cyprus, and of course, can you imagine someone arriving and maybe with a 10 years difference and seeing at a certain point the sea gate in this way? You immediately get to understand that, okay, Venetians are here. I mean, the island is, I think there's no doubt. So the first, as Tassos was saying, Famagusta was the door to the island, and the sea gate is a clear document and a clear statement that we are here in all our power. These are, as we said, Famagosta and Otello Castle is the place that preserved the highest number of inscriptions, of lions, and combined with inscriptions. And here you can see the different. And recalling Elisabetta Molteni's talk this morning, maybe it's not by chance. So this was the entrance to the island of Cyprus, and the walls were the walls enclosing the urban part of the city, or at least the heart of Famagusta, and they are placed on the main corner, a sort of protection. If you enter through the sea gate, it was the most majestic one. If you enter the citadel, you need to pass beneath it. And this one actually, here we don't have the lion. And again, thinking about the medium is the message. I don't know, it's difficult for us today, so this picture was took in front of the bastion at the same highness on the road that passed through. It's different for us to be able to read, but again, the figure of the lion is recognizable. We don't need to do visual acuity studies to define from which distance you can see under which light condition, because it's more representative, it's more a mark than something really functional for written communication, at least. So, and here again, the inscription is on the base. As Tassos was saying, is not so readable and visible, so someone could even ask why they placed that there. It's again functional because we have the monument, probably the lion was on the top, and again they keep combining the figure of the lion with the script, with this new script that is very different from the past Gothic. So what is happening is that they really promote not so much an epigraphic landscape, but I would say a visual landscape, meaning that they broaden the communication, the textual communication, embedding visual elements. So it made their message even stronger. We should then start asking what kind of message they wanted to deliver. So for sure, promotion, the works along in the cities, here in the Famagusta city walls, and in other cities, but mostly I think their presence their presence that, as we saw, was radiating from the cities across the countryside. I think and really hope that in future new evidence, new research will highlight this phenomenon. Tassos also showed us how through the coat of arms, so not through inscription, but through other visual elements that are for sure connected with Venice, we can start seeing how Venetians were spreading also in the territories in a really clear way. And they managed to do it, so to basically highlight their presence, mark the territory, shape the landscape through their symbols. Again, the letter and the lion. They managed to do it so well in less than a century that here you see the, you see the Carigna Gate in Nicosia with a picture with the scale and with no scale. This was one of our survey. And so they managed to do it so well that when the beginning of, in the first half of the 20th century, the gate was restored, this inscription appeared. So as you can see, it's most probably, again, we didn't manage, it's pretty clear that they are not the same epigraphs. They're two pieces from two different artifacts, but they were reassembled and placed there. On the top of the gate, with the tura of the Sultan on the top, and King George 1931 inscription on the side. The gate was like that in 1905, pictures by Foscari, and you can see that most probably only the tura was there. So when, during the British rule, the door was, the gate was restored, they most probably found, I'm trying to find any information about this. I know that Geoffrey was in charge of the restoration. He had also an exchange with Enlart about possible how it could have looked like, what to do. This Carigna Gate as Paphos Gate were modified in order to allow the traffic, so cars to get in and out more easily, but I haven't yet found any information or description about where they found or where they took this inscription. Maybe, yeah, we have some news on that. But yes, the British, during the restoration, they felt that, okay, it's part of the history, and let's place it there and just show that we arrived here after the Venetian and the Ottoman, now it's us to rule. And again, we are on a city gate of the capital. To conclude, so this visual strategy they implemented to promote the presence and identity on the island was at a certain point also entered in the local community. Here it's the house of Hagiorgakis Cornesius, the most famous dragoman of Cyprus, and in the coat of arms he inserted the lion with the tower, so with an iconography really copying, reproducing the Venetian one, in order to show his most probably also his work, first of all, so the fact that he could communicate and was in touch with the different communities, but also, yeah, of course, it was a sort of status symbols at a certain point to have, and to be able to bear in your family or to associate it with the figure of the lion. We have another example that is in the database. I didn't take a picture about the Podocathros family that is in Tersefano in Aia Marina. So we see beyond the lion that also at a certain point the capital script, humanistic at a certain point, also enters in other inscriptions without the lion, but we are at a bit later moment. I think this was my last one, yes. And the next step after this is the opening slides in Larnaca. So you can really see how they didn't actually invented something new. They just took and put together very successful element, reshaped, proposed the letter and the lion together, and just spread it all around. So they managed to get a symbol, a visual and textual symbol, very recognizable, that was working even for communities not speaking, not understanding Latin, not reading Venetian, not reading Latin alphabet at all, but they could anyway understand the message, and mostly that Venetians were there and how they were shaping the landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia, for this very stimulating presentation. And I'm going to ask the public if there's any question for Mia. We have to wait a little bit. Tassos?
Thank you. Do you think, since we talked about mastic in inscriptions this morning, those on the citadel corners, which, as you said, are not easily legible. I mean, you have to have either binoculars or a very good lens to see, to read the text. Could they have been highlighted with mastic or with something else to be better legible from far away?
I think so. Definitely, if one day we manage to... It was not working? Okay. So if one day we will manage to go, it seems there are some traces. It was very interesting to learn that if there's mastics, the furrow is different, so we don't have a V-shape trace, but around one. We can try even without drones to get more close pictures, but it seems that there was, yeah,
for sure.
While in this one, it's visible, at least I think that maybe the top one could have, I don't know, it's like I see, yeah. They are not so regular, but maybe, but I don't know if there's any, I was thinking about field letters with metal. I don't know if in this period we have any examples.
In that period,
yeah.
Gilded, yeah.
Gilded, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the only one, if I recall.
Yeah, the problem is that inscriptions have been whitewashed for a long time. That's the real problem, even in museums. So with, you know, water, like water gun, I don't know how you call that.
Example, you can see inside that the 15th century inscriptions have been totally whitewashed. Yeah. I think Mia raised a very interesting underlying problem in that discussion when you talked about the medium and the message, because that the message appears to change in terms of medium and the actual written content of the message in the Renaissance period, we seem to be moving towards a period of restriction to an elite in terms of the actual meaning of the writing. With Latin, and I don't mean the ecclesiastical medieval Latin, which in a way was probably legible up to a point by people who could read the vernacular. But in the proper Renaissance period, we're moving towards a restriction of who can actually understand the message. So the ones that I was talking about this morning, essentially, they were restricted to an elite. They were gradually becoming restricted to an elite. But as you said, the landscape, the epigraphic message, it's almost as if it becomes a landscape in itself. I'll give you one example of this is at the Scuola Grande di San Giovanni Evangelista that I mentioned. I talked about the inscription by, in Latin that's over the septum there by Lombardo, by Pietro Lombardo. It's interesting that before 1480, there are many inscriptions within the Scuola Grande di San Giovanni Evangelista. Off the top of my head, I reckon there must be 7 or 8 surviving inscriptions within the scuola, in the precincts of the scuola or inside the buildings. All the ones, except one, before 1480 are in Venetian. They're all in the vernacular, and they're actually conveying a specific message, i.e. they tell you who has died, or who has paid for the inscriptional artifact, the names of the brothers, the names of the leaders and so on, all in the vernacular. And then all of a sudden, at 1480, round about 1480, this changes. And it becomes a message which is an end in itself, that the actual inscriptional artifact, the impact of it, the fortuna, the impact, becomes the inscription itself and not what it's saying in terms of the writing. And that seems to be a kind of general development in this period, a restriction. Okay?
Yeah. It's like the content works into different levels. So up to a certain point is the textual content, then is the visual one that is more efficient and working.
Exactly. Just to reinforce this, Venice, of course, had one of the highest levels of literacy in Europe throughout the 13th and 12th, 13th and 14th centuries. Very high level of literacy, as we know from signatures, from wills and so on. And so a lot of people understood. These were people who belonged to rich organizations like the Scuole Grandi and Piccole, which contributed massively towards the life of the city and the life of the people who were in the confraternities. And the message was aimed at them and at the general public and at everyone. And then all of a sudden, it becomes restricted to an elite, you know, just at the point when the inscriptional script changes as well. And remember, I don't know if Flavia mentioned it, but in the 14th century, 13th and 14th centuries, we've got evidence that people found Roman inscriptions hard to read. They understood what to us are the very complicated, ornate Gothic inscriptions were actually easier to read than what we now consider Times New Roman that we're used to using. So there's a paradigm shift. There's a real paradigm shift in what inscriptions are being used for and who they're aimed at, I think, in this period.
Any more questions for Mia?
Then again, sorry, on this line, I'm always thinking about the facade of San Julian. With the Latin, the Greek, and the Hebrew inscription, who could read? But people could recognize that they were exotic script, maybe not exactly which kind of script it was, but it was there. They were able to do it. So, and the importance was to show that we have this knowledge and we don't,
That's exactly right, I think.
And I think, sorry, up to a certain point, what they managed to do is, at a certain point, even without the figure of the lion, maybe towards the end, but just having the humanistic capital, it was something distinctive of...
It was an elite projection.
It's how it works today. I mean, I don't recall now an example, but there's a specific script, Disney. Even if the script, the font that Disney uses is not used to write Disney, you can recognize it and you immediately reconnect to it. He managed to do this very, very strong marketing strategy that
trademark.
Even, it was the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Communication is amazing for that because it's tricky.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions?
No, I think we are done.
Okay,
I
so
killed
perhaps no. So the program says some final remarks by myself. No, togli, mette la locandina.
Ok.
Mette la locandina. So to draw conclusions is always a dirty job. And I'm not going to sum up what every colleague said. You have the book of abstracts for that. What I was thinking of doing while they prepare a cocktail in the next room, that's what we're all aiming at, is just to highlight what struck me most, perhaps, in each presentation, and above all, what the common features are, the trait d'union that I spotted, and perhaps leave some open questions that we can actually discuss over a glass of wine or in the future. So, Donald Cooper offered us a perfect introduction to our conference. He welcomed us on board of his galley. We may call it the Cooperina, in honor of his patron. And he took us on a metaphorical sea voyage that had us sail through Istria, Dalmatia, Albania, Greece, and Crete, and finally Cyprus. We explore how the Venetian Republic knitted its fragmentary territories together through an extraordinary system of military and civic architecture that gave the diverse territories of the Sea Empire a shared sense of Venezianità under the flag of the winged lion of St. Mark. In the first of today's talks, Flavia de Rubens explored the relationship between patronage and writing techniques in late medieval Venice with a specific focus on San Giovanni and Paolo. She showed us how, in Venetian inscriptions dating to the 13th and mainly 14th and 15th centuries, writing techniques varied according to patronage and epigraphic customs. So while funerary inscriptions commissioned by the Doges, for instance, tended to stick to the use of the Gothic script in its fully decorated and gilded version, the so-called scontornata, I think we can translate it as raised letters, as Ronnie later suggested. The signatures of artists, sometimes coming from Tuscany, appear to be more receptive towards the new taste of capital script, derived from classical models. In the following paper, on the defense of cities and islands in the Stato da Mare, Elisabetta Molteni explored 3 significant case studies, Corfu, Crete, and Cyprus, and her presentation elucidated very well how numerous actors were involved in the decision-making process of fortifying the maritime territories of the Republic, each of them with specific competencies. The Senate and central magistrates, local governors and local communities, military experts, architects, engineers, craftsmen, and soldiers. And of all places, Cyprus appears to be the most noteworthy as far as the defense of a Renaissance stronghold of the Venetian state is concerned. So I was very struck by the example of Nicosia, whose fortification was discouraged by military experts, but supported by Venetian politicians and local aristocracy. Then, in his extremely rich and stimulating paper on the evolution of Renaissance epigraphy in Venice, Ronnie Ferguson deconstructed some of the consensus narrative on this topic, which has been, to my humble opinion, amazingly little explored and still deserves further investigation. So he showed us how the introduction of Roman epigraphic capitals to Venice took place, and he offered a convincing, in my view, chronology for the three main groups of humanistic inscriptions produced in this city in the 15th century. So some very amazingly early cases dating to the 1430s and 1440s, then the beautiful, in my view, and eccentric, playful inscriptions that were written in the mid-400 and right after that, and finally the more standardized and elegant capital script produced from 1500 onward. In the last presentation of the morning, Sofia Catopi investigated how the material remains of Venetian Crete, including whole buildings, monuments such as fountains, coats of arms, and inscriptions, were reused, restored, or also deliberately defaced, beginning with the Venetian times, which was also quite amazing, and of course later in Ottoman and later times, let's say in modern Greek times. And it was also particularly interesting to see how impactful the urban modernization works that took place when Crete was an autonomous, for a short time, territory between the late 19th and early 20th century. These kind of initiatives took place under the protectorate, let's say, of 4 different Western European countries, so like a rather colonial approach, we could say. Then this afternoon, we're here, but I would just like to remind how Tassos, Papacostas closely examined how the pre-existing links that Cypriot architecture had with Italy were renewed under the Venetian rule of the island, how all'antica elements were combined with heraldry, and perhaps to a lesser extent to epigraphy. So this point came out in Tassos's presentation, and later how little, in the end, written evidence of displayed writing, scritture esposte we have in Venetian Cyprus, apparently at least. Especially, I would say, in the countryside, or perhaps to a lesser extent in the main cities, in Nicosia and Famagosta. In the following presentation, Gilles Grivaud reminded us that the number of inscriptions from Venetian Cyprus is surprisingly small, and that most texts composed in Renaissance Cyprus, whether by local chroniclers or Venetian authors, give little space to epigraphy. And the same goes, we may say, with travel accounts written by pilgrims who visited the island on their way to the Holy Land, who addressed their curiosity rather towards Christian landmarks or ancient archaeological sites later, but to ruins, not to inscriptions. There are some exceptions, like the case of Christoph Führer, who visited Cyprus in the 1560s, who was definitely more interested in medieval and contemporary inscriptions, and offers us some transcriptions which are the only evidence that we have for some texts. And of course, later works like travel accounts with specific interests in archaeology. I always like it when we remind ourselves that there's a beautiful text by Giovanni Antonio Soderini lying in the library of the Correr Museum unpublished, which is one of the richest descriptions of the archaeological sites of Cyprus in the mid-17th century. And I do hope that we will all together, or some of us, or any of us, publish it at some point. Well, the following presentation was very clear. So Agustinos Augusti and Tatiana Tomasi introduced us to the main features of the digital resource on Venetian inscriptions, which we created with through the LETTERA E IL LEONE project, both its back end and its front end, the contents and the structure of the platform. And finally, Mia Trentin, in her final paper, she examined how public epigraphy was used as a marketing strategy, as we just said, by the Serenissima to highlight its presence in Cyprus, both on a graphic, let's say, textual and visual level. For me, the case that she showed at the very end of the presentation, of her presentation on Kyrenia Gate is really interesting, because it's a case like the one that Ronnie showed us, the wellhead of the Ognissanti monastery. It's a case where epigraphy generates more epigraphy. So there was the Venetian inscription, and then George, the King of England, decided to add another inscription. And perhaps the Ottoman too. We don't know where the inscription was in Ottoman times, but the adding of the surah may have been related to the presence of the Venetian inscription. So this is just to tell you what struck me most. Of course, many more things, but we don't have so much time left. But I would just like to conclude with some open questions, some points that, in my view, came out throughout the conference and are particularly interesting, and we can perhaps talk more about them at some point in a future project or in a future meeting. First of all, the relationship between center and periphery. That was really interesting, because I think several papers deconstructed the idea that models come from the motherland, from Venice, and are then expanded to the territories of the Maritime Empire. It's not as easy as that, and several territories. I was really amazed by Jasenka Gudel's answer that she gave out of the blue yesterday when there was a question on the use of stone in Dalmatia, because Dalmatia plays a very, very important role, and a central role, in my view, at least in the humanistic period, in the Quattrocento. So this role is underestimated, and it's not a peripheric area. Neither is Crete, for instance. When we talked about Contarini's collection of antiquities in Crete in around 1420, who had a collection of antiquity in Venice? Almost nobody, but there was one in the middle of the Cretan countryside. So I think we have to reshape our ideas of or just get rid of our ideas of center and periphery. Then another point which came out, perhaps wasn't so highlighted, but I think it's worthy of further investigation, is the role of workshops. So physically, where were the inscriptions produced? Because we know that many products came, for instance, to Cyprus from Venice itself. There's a beautiful document in the State Archive that says, we don't have a blackmonger who's good enough to produce the gate for the sea gate in Famagusta. So ask someone at the Arsenale to produce it and ship it over. What about these beautiful inscriptions that we saw? Were they carved in Cyprus or in Crete, or were they physically made in Venice and shipped? Or because if you even look at this one in detail, as we did, it's made of different blocks of stone. So was it made all at the same time? Was it restored at some point? Was the inscription made somewhere and the lion somewhere else? We don't have an answer for that now, but for instance, I think that petrographic analysis would be very interesting to look at where exactly the marbles that were used for inscriptions or other artifacts in Cyprus or elsewhere in the Stato da Mar were quarried. So that's something that we should do perhaps at some point. Of course, it's not easy for the reasons that I explained, for instance, working in the northern part of Cyprus. Well, the small number of inscriptions, that's a problem for sure. That's a fact. we are now facing a small number of surviving inscriptions from Venetian Cyprus, and I totally agree with Gilles when he said that we must study public epigraphy together with other kinds of inscriptions. So, of course, first of all, inscriptions written in other languages, so Greek or Armenian, or on other kinds of objects, not only stone, but also paintings, portable objects, funeral inscriptions, of course. But on the other hand, as we were saying at the very end of Mia's presentation, and as Ronnie pointed out too, I mean, there's the medium and there's the message. So I really like what you said, Ronnie. The epigraphic landscape becomes a message in itself. So the visual role of the inscription. I'm thinking, for instance, of the reused Roman inscriptions in the Cathedral of Pisa in the mid-12th century. They are put upside down, they are fragments, but we know that they were brought from Ostia to show that Pisa had a link with Rome, with ancient Rome. So it didn't really matter that the Pisa people back then understood, but that they mentioned Trajan as opposed to Hadrian or any other emperor. I mean, what they cared for was a link with antiquity in that case, with ancient Rome. So the visual message, I think I stressed that enough, or I tried to do it in my presentation at the beginning of the conference. Epigraphy is written communication. So there is no sense in communicating something if the public doesn't understand it. So a written text must communicate something, which does not necessarily correspond to its content. It can be something broader, it can be a visual message, but if the inscriptions are there or are not there, it has to do with communication. This is my opinion as an epigrapher. And also when we were saying that, okay, there are few inscriptions, it's true, but I was looking at Giovanni Maritti's text, who describes Cyprus in the mid-18th century, and when he talks about San Nicolò, the Catholic cathedral, he says, dentro questa chiesa vi restano diverse lapidi sepolcrali. Qui furono già sotterrati il re Giacomo Bastardo, il re Giacomo suo figlio. Di rimpetto alla chiesa, sopra la piazza, vi sono 3 arcate sostenute da diverse colonne, aventi nel mezzo l'arme della Repubblica di Venezia. Il rimanente del muro è tutto pieno di armi di famiglie veneziane genovesi. There's nothing left of this. So this was 200 years or less than 200 years after the fall of Famagusta. 300 more years have passed and nothing is left. So we're really dealing with a big dispersal, I think, of the evidence that used to exist in Cyprus or elsewhere. So I think that's about what I wanted to say, and there are 2 things that we still have to do. Take a photograph of the whole of us with the beautiful background, I think, even if it's not sunny, but I think it's still nice. It's the only place in Venice where you can see both the Rialto Bridge and the Accademia Bridge, so it's worth taking a photo of this group of scholars and have a toast, perhaps, if the aperitivo is ready in the next room. Thank you very much indeed for participating.
It works. Could I, on behalf of everybody, of the speakers and everybody else, thank you and Mia for organizing this, for inviting us, for the useful discussions and the hospitality and everything else. Thank you.